Good morning. My name is David Margolin, and today I'm going to give you a sort of a 3-minute preview of how I make my 16 to 20 day forecast. The mark date today is September 17th. Our forecast window is days 16 to 20, October 2nd to October 6th, and we're forecasting CDDs. Before I get going, I want to give a special thank you to Maxar, who provides most of the data that we use for our contest, and also a lot of forecast information, which I'm going to reference in today's video. All right, so normally one of the first things I do is I look at the performance metrics, and I tend to look at performance metrics from the last 30 and 90 days, and sometimes longer term too. In some cases, you can see different types of trends. And so when I just look at the cooling season here and I sort it, one thing that stands out, and we've seen this all summer, is that the 10-year normal has been the best performer. In particular, we're looking at forecast counts of, let's say, at least 50% or 75%. You can see some other folks here have done well, but the forecast counts or the sample sizes have been pretty small. But the normal, again, has generally done well. And you can see that in this column here under performance. Positive numbers are good, negative numbers tend to be bad. Something else that stands out here, and this will factor into my forecast formula today, is the ECMWF and CFS. And they've been, in particular, the CFS has been consistently bad. And I use the word consistently intentionally because, if something is consistent, then it's reliable, and that tells you that you should, at least I think that you should put less weight on it. It could also tell you that there could be a bias correction potential, but we'll talk about that in a different video. But the ECMWF here has been a little bit better, but also not still well below normal. I should say all these numbers are in reference to the 30-year normal. I'm also going to take a look here just at the most recent week. And the most recent week of verification is from 8/27. I can double check that. I'm going to click on 9/3. Yep, and we don't have the scores yet, the 999s. So going back to August 27th, sorting it, I can see here again the normal 10-year has done very well. Philip Yeh, one of the Rutgers students, performed the best, and he's also been one of the best performers just over the long term. You can see near the bottom the CFS and the ECMWF in the middle. All right, so again, so that definitely tells me that I'm going to pay special consideration to the 10-year. I'm also going to keep in mind formulas from folks like Philip and Steve Decker here too, Professor Decker, who have consistently done well, and keeping in mind those their formulas and what their strategy statements. All right, so now this is our forecast submission form, and here is our Google Excel or Google spreadsheet that we provide users. In the spreadsheet, I also each week provide my analysis for folks to look at or ignore. I won't go through all of this today, to try to keep this short. But this is all the information I use in order to kind of come up with my formula statement, which is part of the forecast contest. I consider the 30-year average, the 10-year normal, ECMWF, the CFS, the Radiant or Maxar forecast now, the trend forecast, which we have a trend input, and I'll show you that in a minute, and the 10 hottest. The 10 hottest I calculate over here in column C and D. And just a quick note on that, the reason I include the 10 hottest, the mean of the 10 hottest is my approach is, the 10-year is not going to capture the fact that climate change is continuing to influence the forecast. And so this was my sort of qualitative or subjective approach to try to better factor in the fact that, the CDDs are likely going to be warmer next year and the year after that than they have been even over the last 10 years. I haven't really tested that formula. It's kind of a work in progress. I have a weighting scheme here too. That's a function of all these different inputs. It's up here. So 50% on the 10-year normal, 25% on my trend input, 10% on the ECMWF, and 15% on 10, the 10 hottest. Just a little bit of information on that. The ECMWF, as I already mentioned, has not been performing well, but it seems to me that it still deserves some weight based on the fact that it's an independent data point. It's the historically the best performing dynamic model. Um, but again, this is somewhat of a subjective number that I came up with. I haven't fully vetted whether 5% or 0% is better than 10%. Noticeably absent is the CFS. I just, again, could not justify, based on the consistently bad performance, adding it to the weighting scheme. The 10-year normal, as I've already mentioned, has been very strong and very consistent, and that's why it's here. A couple additional data points that I tend to look at. Again, thanks to Radiant, they provide a nice report here that we get to look at. And again, just for sake of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this today, but maybe in future forecasts, I'll talk a little bit more about it. But I do look at their process and think about that. In today's report, they mention GLAM, or atmospheric angular momentum. Historically, I've always had a tough time separating that from the MJO and figure out how I should add that to my forecast, or fade or skew my forecast just as a function of that. So I tend not to put as much weight on the angular momentum as they do. But basically, high level, what I see here is certainly a very warm forecast, and it looks like something that's pretty close to the ECMWF. All right, the other input that I'm going to reference here, we have RiskPulse has also been a nice contributor to the forecast contest. They provide these reports, daily reports, to folks who participate. And in their reports, they have a 16 to 25 day forecast. So a lot of times I like to make a read through of their report. Here, some of the takeaways: 60-40 warm skew. They tend to provide a directional number. We don't have a forecast mean, unfortunately. And in terms of the reasoning, they reference the ECMWF and CFS, things like that. They also have, I think, a nice breakdown in terms of warm variables, mixed variables, and cold variables. So, again, in some cases, I might see something that I haven't considered, or, obviously, if they have a skew or a forecast that's significantly different, it's something that I want to pay attention to, which could possibly influence my forecast. All right, so back to my forecast. So at this point, what I'll do, just to get to my final number, is I think. I should also mention that as I go through my process, I always look at again on the Maxar site. I look at the forecast, the GFS, and the ESM, in particular the ensemble models, in the 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15 day period. It doesn't necessarily change my forecast, but I think it's really helpful to see what's leading up to the 16 to 25 day forecast, or 16 to 20 day forecast. So in this case, I'm looking at kind of North America. Here's the 1 to 5 day. This is the EC ensemble. You can see very warm pattern, clearly, with the ridge in the east. 6 to 10, still a warm pattern for east and national CDDs in general, and even into the 11 to 15. So the EC's painting a message that, this is not a transition of a warm pattern into the 16-20. It's a continuation, right? It's warm now. The EC has it warm in the 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15 into the 16 to 20. I guess I emphasize that point because at least there's a rule of thumb that forecasting transitions is more problematic for the numerical guidance than forecasting maybe a persistent pattern. I think that's a debatable point, but I think that's a rule of thumb. Looking at the GFS real quick, the GFS ensemble 1 to 5, still very warm. This is an interesting data point. I happened to look at this earlier, so I knew this was coming. But you can see the 6 to 10 is quite a bit cooler than the EC. Here's the EC, just as a comparison, so you can see in the eastern half of the country. So, again, just for brevity, long story short, I did kind of zoom out just to look at the pattern a little bit. It wasn't clear to me why the GFS is so much cooler, or that the GFS is more likely to be right, or that I should change my weighting scheme. So at the end of the day, I think it's an interesting observation, but it doesn't change my skew at this point. If I had more time to do research or analytics, I would love to kind of back test this a little bit. And maybe this is a research exercise for future contests, um, where we could see in these kinds of scenarios which model does better. Because if indeed the GFS, if there's some objective information that suggests the GFS is handling this pattern configuration better, then that might change my thinking here. And perhaps I would go to a cooler kind of lean, thinking that there might be more variability as we get into the 6 to 10 and 11 to 15. But as of today, I don't have that information. And I'm just gonna make an observation, and again, maybe it's something that we in the forecast contest group can look into in a future study. Um, the last but not least, I try to look at just some general analysis plots. There's a lot of stuff here on the WX prediction page, the real time page, which, if interested, you can access from here, the weather snapshot. Um, in particular, I like to look at the MJO data, and you can see the MJO right now is kind of moving to phases 8 and 1. Again, I'm going to do a little bit of a long story short here and say that it's not clear to me, based on where the MJO is or where it's forecast to be, which is, it looks like kind of still, this is from the ECMWF, kind of circling around phase 1, that I should shift my forecast warmer or colder. I also find this time of year a little bit problematic in terms of trying to use the MJO to skew a forecast, because we're in a sort of a transition time of year, September, October, where the relationships can be kind of messy. And I'll maybe highlight some of those relationships a little bit more in our next discussion. All right, so I'm going to bring this to a close here. So I think the bottom line here is I'm going to go with my user-defined weightings, which gets me to about a 19.9. That's here. That's for my forecast average, forecast mean, and for my sigma value, I usually put a lot of weight on the 30-year, because I think the 10 years too short. But usually I do a little bit of a subjective blend there, so maybe I'll go something like a 7.2 or something like that. So the final step is to enter those numbers into my spreadsheet here, along with my formula statement strategy, and then to hit submit. But since I've kind of gone over my time here for brevity, I'm going to skip that step for the video. Thank you very much, and look forward to doing this again next week.